Hi, my name's Julian Cundiff and welcome to my carp room. That's another letter answered, one of dozens I receive each and every week. Over the years I must have received thousands of letters from carp anglers. Why do carp anglers write to Julian Cundiff? Is he an expert carp angler? Is he a top carp angler? He certainly hasn't caught thousands of big carp. The reason why carp anglers write to me is that I give them confidence in their carp fishing. Years ago when I started carp fishing, I relied on people like MADDOCKS and Rod Hutchinson to reply to my letters. When I got a reply from a person like that, I had the confidence to put into action the things that I'd been doing for months anyway. They'd tell me to use a certain bait, I was using that bait anyway, and I used that bait and I was full of confidence. And that's all these letters are. They are an envelope of confidence to the carp angler. And that's what we want these videos to be. Julian Cundiff has written thousands of words about carp fishing. He's written about baits, he's written about rigs, and he's written about tactics. And he says the same baits and rigs and tactics. Do they work? Well, the pictures in the press prove they work. They certainly work for me, and I can make them work for you. So what I'm going to do is give you confidence in your carp fishing. What we're going to do with these videos is a very special video. We're going to take you carp fishing the Julian Cundiff way, from the beginning until the end, putting the master plan into action, from the research to the rigs and the baits. You're going to go carp fishing with Julian Cundiff. For many people, carp fishing begins and ends Friday to Sunday. That is a big mistake. Carp fishing is all about the preparation that you do before and after your fishing, hence my carp study. This carp study is absolutely crammed full of information, of all the magazines that I need to help me with the venues I choose, the Carp Talks, the Angling Times, the Carp Worlds. You don't know where you're going to fish in a year or two, you don't know where you're going to fish in 5 years' time. Research is what you need to do. Everything I need to know about carp fishing is contained in here. All the articles, there are articles by people on waters that I might want to fish one day. I'm not fishing Yateley, but if I want to fish Yateley, then I'm going to turn to these magazines, all the information on Yateley that I need. The water I'm going to take you to is one of my local carp waters. It's not an easy water, and it's not a particularly hard water. It's a water where I would say the average carp angler goes fishing. There are many good fish in the water, and it's a typical carp water that many of you will aspire to fishing. Anyway, enough of all that, let's go carp fishing with Julian Cundiff. Because carp fishing is so important to me, I have to get everything right. It's no good having the right rod, the right reel and the wrong choice of mainline, because that will cost me fish, the same as it will cost you fish. I've learnt over the last 10 years about some horrendous items of tackle that was guaranteed to catch me lots of carp. It never did. Learn by my mistakes. What I'm going to do is take you through my major items of tackle. I'm lucky. I can choose the very best. I only use the best. So I'll take you through the major items I choose and why I choose them, and a few little tips as well on how to keep those items performing correctly. We'll start with rods. The rods I'm using at the present are the Daiwa 3.5 pound test curve, the Infinity, the new Infinity rods. Now some of you will be thinking to yourself, a 3.5 pound test curve rod, surely that is far too strong. A lot of people think that hooks are pulled out by strong rods. Well, they can be pulled out by strong rods, but more hooks are pulled out by bad playing of fish. You're using a line with very little stretch, a large lead and a small hook. That will pull hooks out of fish if you don't use them correctly. This rod should be a lever, an extension of your arm to play the fish in. A 3.5 pound test curve rod allows me to cast 3 to 4 ounce leads very accurately. That accuracy will catch me lots of fish. The actual blank itself is a superb blank and it's long lasting. I expect to get 3 to 5 years out of that. One thing to take notice of, as they come, the line clips on most rods are too hard. They're too abrasion on your main line. That will actually cause your main line to part. Just use a standard line clip, cover it with tape, and your actual main line will click in there and there'll be no damage. Another little extra I've put on this rod is this Velcro here. this Velcro will actually match the Velcro on my rear rod rests, and when I get a take, the rod won't be dragged off. Always keep your rod as clean as possible, for when you're casting out, any grime as your line slaps against the side of the rod, grime will actually cut down your distance when you cast. So just keep them nice and clean. You don't need to go to extreme lengths and polish them, just keep the grime and the muck off them. Always check the inside of the eyes to make sure they're not cracked. The high 10 style, and they can actually crack, and that will actually cut down the distance. Excellent rods. The rod to the left of it is a new rod that I'm testing for Daiwa. This is actually the rod that I use when I'm using a marker float. This is actually even a stronger rod. It's a 4-pound test curve rod. The reason it's stronger is that when I'm casting out a marker float and a lead like that, there's a great deal of air resistance and I need to cast out even harder. This rod allows me to do that. Again, that's a rod that's not currently on sale, but it will be in a year or two. All the best companies like Daiwa, Hutchinson and MADDOCKS field test their rods so that when you get them, they're the best available. Regarding reels, there are many good reels on the market nowadays. Shimano's, Daiwa's, Ryobi's, Dam's. The most important factor in any reel is that the clutch works. That clutch must pay out line smoothly. With the strong rods that we're using and with the heavy leads that we're using, if that clutch does not work properly and pay out line, you will pull hooks out of fish. So no matter what reel you choose, you must make sure that clutch works correctly. To make sure that clutch works correctly, you need to keep your reels clean. Once a week, just take the spool off, wash it down with warm water and make sure you don't get any grit around the back of that area. That is where you undo your clutch, and if you get any muck, dirt or grit in there, then it will seize your clutch up. Again, you've got to look after them. Roller, make sure that's not caked in fish oils or it will not turn as smoothly. The second type of reel I use is a larger reel. This is a Daiwa emblem reel. Again, this is the reel that I use for very long range fishing or for when I'm casting out my marker float. Because a marker float is not very aerodynamic, you actually have to give it a bigger cast. With it being a bigger spool, it actually does go out further. Again, these are excellent reels. They are very expensive, but you don't need to buy these type of reels brand new. Look in the back pages of Angling Times, Carp Talk and Carp World. You'll find these at a third or half price second hand. Go and pick them up and they'll be just as good as a new one. Equally important as your rod and reel combination is the line that you choose, because it's the line that puts you in contact with the fish. I've used many types of lines over the years, and I have to say that at the moment this is the best line in my opinion. This is Berkeley Trilene XT. It's available in clear or green and in 12, 14 or 20 pounds. 14 will actually break at 22 pounds, so it's incredibly strong. Because it's abrasion resistant, it will withstand any weed, snags, lily pads, things of that nature. That will not let you down. Of course, that kind of line which is pre-stretched is not ideal for all types of fishing because it is not so smooth and supple. For long range fishing it is less than ideal. For that I would use the Berkeley Big Game Specimen line or the new Fox line that I'm field testing. Again, it's horses for courses. You don't use the same line all the time. You pick what is best for the situation you're in. Again, look at the lines, look at where you're fishing, and if you have to change lines, change lines. Just don't keep on the same line week in, week out, month in, month out. And always make sure you have plenty of spare spools with you. There's nothing worse than having a fish go through weed, crack your line, and then think, oh, I'll have to spool up with more line. If your line's already spooled up, all you need to do is put that on the reel, tie on a new rig, and you're fishing. Little things like that will give you lots more fish in the long run. The buzzer. Most of you will have these buzzers, be it a Fox, a Delkim or an Optonic. I'm lucky now that I have the best buzzer on the market. This is a Fox Micron DXR. For a buzzer to be any use to me, it's got to be loud, sensitive, waterproof and reliable. This satisfies all those criteria. All I need to say about buzzers is contained in a Fox Micron DXR. No need to say any more. If the buzzer you're using is okay, stick with it. But if you're looking for the best buzzer, this is the one to use. The buzzers are mounted on what we call Jule bars. It's called a Jule bar because there's a rod rest at each end. When you place it into the ground, as I'll show you later, this cannot move at all. Any movement will be a fish taking the line. When that indicator bleeps, I know it's a fish and not wind movement. So Jule bars are ideal in my circumstances. Just behind, we have the rear rod rest grips. Remember the rods, the black Velcro? Well, the black Velcro rests on the green Velcro and stops a rod being pulled through. You can lift the rod off easily enough, but it can't go shooting forward and cost you your rod. Again, these are mounted on Jule bars with a bank stick at each end. And here's a bit of kit that I like to put to use most nights. This is my landing net. Now this is a Fox landing net, which is a nice lightweight landing net. If you look at the pole, that's a 5-foot pole. I used to advocate using the extending poles that went between 8 and 9 foot, but they really are too unwieldy, especially on your own. Notice the isotope here on the block. When you're drawing the fish in at night, you can actually see where the block is and how far you need to draw the fish in. Free flow mesh, sprung arms, and at the top of each arm there's a single strong isotope. By having an isotope in each corner of your landing net, you can actually draw the fish through the isotopes, the entrance of the isotopes. You draw the fish in towards the isotope on your block, and then you can net the fish a lot easier. I've seen far too many fish lost. In fact, I've lost good fish myself through poor netting. This stops that problem. So if your landing net hasn't got isotopes, make sure you put some in each corner. The actual rods themselves are housed in these rod sleeves. There's no need to cut your rigs off each and every time you go fishing. You can just break your rod into two and pop it in the rod sleeve. It saves you a lot of time and time off fish, especially in these summer days. The rod sleeves themselves go into the rod hold hole, and the rod hold hole goes in your back, as I'll describe later. And now for those interesting little things called tackle boxes. Every carp angler likes to look into another carp angler's tackle boxes to see exactly what he's taking fishing with him, and I'm no exception. The problem with all these boxes is that more boxes you take, the more little bits and pieces you take fishing. These are all part of the Fox System Select, various boxes that fit inside each other. I take 2 large boxes. This box is full of all the matters that are used for end tackles. The leads, the tubing, the little Corda rubbers, and the anti-tangle tubing. Now some people will say, why do you take all those leads? Well, sometimes I want to drop from a 4-ounce lead to a 3.5-ounce lead. Maybe I want to go to a flat lead instead of a flat liner lead. I might want to use a running lead. And if all these items are at home, I'm struggling. I'm going to start fishing inefficiently. So yes, it's a little bit more weight, but it allows me to fish efficiently. The larger box has a majority of my items in it. It has the hooks, all the braids, the back leads, and all these little bits and pieces that are so essential. Tipex for marking the line, knot glue, scissors, scalpel, spare marker float. We're going to go through these when we go fishing, but there are lots of little bits and pieces. Don't just chuck things in little empty cartons. Like this, you know where everything is. I have a separate box in which I keep all my PVA. PVA is a vital in carp fishing nowadays, and it's no good just taking some PVA string. With this I can cater for all eventualities. I've got PVA tape, PVA string, various sizes of PVA bags. I also keep my stringer needle in here and my scissors, so I don't need to keep going into my main tackle box. When I want to tie up a stringer or want to put a PVA bag of free offerings out, I can use everything that's in there, that's sufficient. Another small little box, spare catapult elastic, smaller floats, and these are very essential. These are little wire cutters. Sometimes the hook will be that far in the carp's mouth, bedded down well, especially with the Fox or the Shima hooks. You actually have to cut the hook in half, and these are excellent. All carp anglers should have those. Lots and lots of spare rigs tied up on these Fox rig boards. Now people are amazed at how many rigs I carry with me, but I never ever use a rig twice. In other words, if I've had a fish, I will tie on a new rig, whether that rig looks correct or not. When I go fishing each night, I tie on a new rig each and every night. So I've got all the different combinations that I might need. I don't waste time tying up the rigs when I'm at the water. I might tie up one or two spare rigs, but when I get to the water and decide which presentation I can use, it's here and ready for me. This saves me time, it means I'm more efficient and I'm more likely to catch fish. And the final little bag I have with me is my camera bag. Again, this is something I hope to put to good use. Inside here I have everything I need. I've got my DXR receiver, binoculars, sunglasses, camera wrapped inside these. It's important to keep these nice and dry. And inside here, all the spare film. I've even got my road licenses, Jack Charlton, take note, and David Hall. Compass, watch, something for my hair, and lots of spare film. There's no point catching the fish of a lifetime and finding you haven't got enough camera film. That would be disastrous, because unless you can go back and catch that fish again, I hope you can, but it's not always likely, you're never going to get good pictures of it. So don't leave yourself short of camera film. It isn't very expensive and it's always worth having. And here we have the chest of plenty. My double freezer, which I keep at home, which is absolutely full of boilies. There's probably some in the region of 20 to 30,000 baits here. Now I'm lucky now that I actually have my baits made for me. I'll get a few baits prepared for today. These little tubs, what I keep my hook baits in. They usually take about half a dozen to a dozen hook baits. You always need to have more than enough. I don't keep them after I've used them. In the summer months it gets very, very warm. The pop-ups will go slightly soft in these jars, and if you refreeze them they'll go even softer. I throw them away after I finish, so I've got some pop-ups ready and also some bottom baits. Because a pop-up looks exactly the same as a bottom bait, I put them in these separate jars. No point just putting a few in a plastic bag and hoping for the best. The worst thing that could happen is you cast out what you think is a bottom bait and it's actually a pop-up, or vice versa. It's going to make your presentation a waste of time. This little bit of planning well in advance will save you. I also have some freezer packs here. In the warm summer months, I keep the boilies in a freezer box, even when I'm doing overnight sessions. Boilies are at their most effective when they are frozen. All these are frozen, but literally within a couple of hours in the warm sun, even in the evenings, they'll start to thaw. By keeping them in a freezer box with these freezer packs, it'll actually keep them rock solid and they'll be very, very effective. One thing about freezers you'll notice is you get this ice building up. You must not let your bait rest against the side of the ice or you get freezer burn, and it can take away the effectiveness. So keep your boilies inside these large plastic bags or paper boxes and it'll stop them getting the freezer burn. As well as the boilies in here, I also keep my Hinders A mix. And the reason why I have to keep that in here rather than outside like normal ground bait is that because it's got liquids in it, it'll start to degenerate in the warmth. So keeping it in here keeps it nice and cool. Literally within an hour or two it'll start to break down, you can make the normal balls out of it. Anyway, enough of that, let's get fishing. I'm using these freezer bags, and I know literally when this is 2/3 full up of boilies that there are exactly £5 of bait in here. Now I won't need £5 of bait for actually fishing tonight, but what I do need to do is give the carp confidence in my free offerings. By taking more bait than is absolutely necessary, any bait that I have left in the morning I will put out to the spots I've seen carp rolling or areas that I'm sure the carp will be. The carp then come along in the day, the next day, pick these free offerings up, they're not getting hooked and they're more confident for next time. So next time I roll up and my baits are in the position, the carp is swimming round again, it sees a free offering, in this case it's a hook bait, picks it up and it's hooked. By putting out more bait than is necessary, you're improving your chances. You don't need to go to these great lengths to catch carp, But I know that by having thousands of baits at my command and putting them in each day, each week, it improves my chances. You don't need to do that, but I can afford to do that, and I'm sure that one day when you've reached my stage, you'll do that. You don't need thousands of boilies to catch carp, but this is sufficient. Anyway, let's get fishing. Right, time to get the show on the road. I've just had a hard day at work and it's time to get fishing. I do try to take the minimum amount of tackle with me for these short sessions. In effect, I've got 12 hours of carp fishing. The last thing I want to be doing is lumbering round with gas bottles, televisions, bait buckets. Everything that I carry, that I put in the cart, I can carry round the lake in one go. No messing about with lots of different little buckets. It's all in those 5 bags. Right, let's see if we can go catch a carp. Now, the thing about carp fishing is that most people get in the car, get down to the lake and start thinking about the fishing then. That's much too late. First of all, I've contacted the weather forecast and they've told me it's going to be a hot evening. It's going to be red hot tonight, so that tells me something about where I'm going to fish. I've had a walk around the lake the day before and there's just odd anglers fishing. Nobody seems to have caught much, so it's obviously the carp are still spawning. They're not really feeding very heavily. All this gives me some idea about where I'm going to fish to start with. There's nothing wrong with thinking about where you're going to fish in advance, as long as you don't have any predetermined ideas about where and when you're going to fish. I like to have at least some idea about where I'm going to fish. I don't like to think I'm going to fish such and such a swim, definitely, but it's good if you can get to the water and think, well, conditions are as I expected, angler pressure as I expected, that's where I'm going to fish. Often you don't have an hour to walk around the water and you've got to make your decision there and then, so at least think about it in advance. Think about it while you're home, think about it in the evening, think about it at work, and I guarantee you'll catch more carp thinking about it. Right, let's get a carp caught. Right, I'm at the water now. I never mind the car journey to the water, whether it's 5 minutes or 5 hours. It gives me a chance to get the old carp brain into gear. At home I may have 1,001 things to do, 1,001 things I haven't done, and yet on the road I can actually start to click into gear. I'm thinking about what I've got to do. Where will other anglers be? How many other anglers there will be here? Which way will the wind be blowing? What have the other anglers done? How much bait have they put in? It's all going into my brain. You can't just turn up at a water and think, I'll start thinking about my carp fishing now. That's far too late. You've got to use the journey for a good purpose. So even if you're stuck in traffic, keep thinking about what you're doing, about where you're going to fish. Don't make a definite decision about where you're going to fish. That's silly. The fish may have been there last week. They probably won't be there this week. They may be, you may be lucky. But don't make that decision until you get to the lake. I know some of the lakes are very crowded and it's tempting to get into your first swim, but that's not the way to do it. As soon as you turn up at the lake, probably the best thing you can do is go and ask other anglers if they've caught any fish. Usually, if you've been a good angler yourself and helped other anglers out, they'll help you out. So let's go and see if those other anglers have caught anything. That's good news. 1 or 2 fish is showing. There's not too many anglers on the lake. I think I'm going to have a walk round first, see which are the best swims. Andy's told me where he's seen a lot of fish showing, but I need to know for myself. So I'll lock the car up and let's have a walk round the lake. One of the problems on carp lakes today is the car thefts and vehicle thefts from vehicles. Problem with fishing tackle, it's worth a lot of money and people will steal from your vehicle. Never ever dream of leaving all this fishing tackle in your vehicle if somebody can't watch it for you or if you can't take it round with you. I'm going to have to walk around the lakes first of all. I'm just going to take a simple bucket round with me to mark my spot when I've chosen a spot. I'm going to leave the tackle in the car. The only reason I'm going to leave the tackle in the car is there's somebody to watch the fishing tackle. If there wasn't, I'd take it all round with me on my back and put it in the right swim. I also make sure I fully lock it. I don't want to lose this. You'll notice the dark clothing that I've got on. Now, a lot of you prefer to wear the more outrageous things, the LA boots, the Puma boots, the bright t-shirts. Now really, that's silly at this day and age. You're going to be looking in the edges, you'll be climbing trees, and you'll be stood looking out over fish. If you wear bright clothes, I'm not saying bright colours will scare fish, but when you move, that contrast will scare the fish. So I prefer to wear the dark coloured clothes. I also have a lot of spare clothes in the car. I'm well known for falling in the water or going in for weeded fish, especially in the summer, so I've got to have the spare clothes in the car. There's no point in going after a fish, getting completely wet through and thinking, I haven't got any spare clothes with me. Straight back to the car, new clothes, recast, saves having to drive an hour home. There's also a few tools of the trade that I would never dream of going round without. First of all, I've got the binoculars. Now binoculars on their own are, well, they're somewhat of a liability. People make a mistake with these. They just watch the water with binoculars. You do get a limited field of vision with binoculars, so you can't just use these. These are all right for watching for carp which are bubbling, clouded water at range, or for looking for fish head and shoulder in certain spots. As well as the binoculars, I've got something here that every carp angler must have. That's the optic sunglasses. In these bright summer days, the last thing you want to have to do is worry about glare off the surface. By having these, it cuts the glare off the surface, and as you see here, I've got a clip at the back of them. When you're up a tree, the last thing you want to do is for your glasses to fall off in the water and to lose them. 20 or 30 pounds these, so you don't want that to happen. There are various types of sunglasses, but these are polarised. These allowed me to look into the water and actually see fish below the water. On days like this in the summer, the carp will actually be laid up close to the edge. You can actually see them close in. The human eye can't break that surface. With the polarising film you can. So let's put it into action. Let's go around walking around the lake and see if we can find a good swim to fish in. As you can see, I've got the white bucket with me to mark my spot. There's no point walking around and choosing a swim and then finding that you've got to go back to the car for your tackle and then you've got nothing to mark your swim. It's well known in carp fishing that leaving a bucket or a water bottle in your swim will mark that area. It also comes in quite handy for sitting and watching the water. Now let's have a look at a couple of these swims and see what the advantages and disadvantages are. The one thing about carp location is they've got to be here when I'm fishing. It's no good if these carp are going to be here tomorrow. I'm restricted to fishing between 6 o'clock in the evening and 6 o'clock in the morning. If those fish are going to be here in the day, that's a waste of time. Just think about when you're fishing. Don't just jump into the obvious hot spots. When are you fishing? What hours are you fishing? How much bait can you put in? You've got to pick a swim that's best for you and not best for the bloke who's a 3-day carp angler. Most carp waters will have swims that are fished day in, day out, day in, day out. It's very tempting to jump into that swim because it's a proven swim. But think about your fishing. Are you going to be here when the carp are picking the baits up? If the carp are picking the baits up at night time and you can only fish evenings, it's a waste of time. So I need to pick a swim where the fish are definitely going to be here during my stay. Let's look at here. Looking across there, you can see what looks like to be an island. Actually, that is a cut through. There'll be a lot of shallow water there, especially where the rushes are. Now in the day, that'll be an excellent swim because the carp will be moving between the lakes through the cut through, which is only 2 foot deep. Now the problem is at night, it's due to be a clear night tonight. Although it's red hot now, as soon as the temperature drops, the water will go a lot colder and those carp will not be in those areas. So they might well be in there at dinner time, but they're not there when I'm fishing at night. So that's not a good place to fish. Out in front of us here, we have what looks like open water. In fact, it is. I've visited this swim probably on half a dozen occasions when I've fished the water, and all we've got here is deep water. Now in the winter, this is an excellent area to fish because the depth of water, you've got 17 foot, but they're certainly not going to be here when I'm fishing in the summertime. As we look across there, towards the end of what's like a long bar, you see the lilies. Various patches of lilies. Now even if you've never fished this water before, you can see the lilies on the surface. That must tell you that that water is shallower than the water on each side of it. Now it's obvious the carp are going to be in those areas. The sun's beating down, carp like warmth on their backs, especially now. There's a bit of wind on the water. As you can see there, the wind is just pushing through that and that will excite the carp. Carp are attracted by wind movement, and people say to me, why does wind attract carp? Well, it's not actually the wind that attracts the carp, it's his effect. When the wind is blowing into the shore, as so, it turns the bottom up. And as it turns the bottom up, it disturbs the natural food. and lots of disturbed natural food is an easy meal for the carp. Carp like easy meals, so you're looking for somewhere where the carp will be where you are and the wind is blowing into it. Now, as you can see here, there's very little wind here. I'd be restricted to putting my baits on both bars, and I don't think it'd give me 2 or 3 options during the night, so I think I'll walk around a little bit further. Yes, this looks more like it. Oh, yes. Now, the thing about carp fishing is the effect that other carp anglers can have on the water. Now, if you look in this swim, there's no carp anglers here, so how could that have an effect? Well, look down there. Somebody must have packed up this morning, they may have had a fish, and they obviously left some disturbed weed. The problem in the summer is that anglers tend to use far too many baits. I don't know what the angler who's been in here before me has done. He may have put 500 boilies out, he may have put 5,000. And unless this looks like it's the swim to fish, I'm not going to go in here. Somebody's obviously been in here beforehand, and I don't know what he's done. It looks good, but it's perhaps not quite the right swim today. Let's move on a bit further. Ah, one of my favourite swims. Let's be nice and quiet here. This looks like a good area. As you can see in front of us here, extensive areas of lily pads. Now, you'll definitely get carp in the day just laid up in here. The only problem is the wind is not strong enough to keep them. You've got to think, what are the conditions now, but what are the conditions going to be like? This area is a proven area when the wind is blowing in. Now, at the moment it's a very slight ripple, but tonight the forecast is for a clear, calm night. The wind's going to drop, and because I know this is not a natural feeding area, the carp will move away. It screams carp now, and perhaps if I put a bait out I might get one, but I'm sure that within an hour or two, once the carp move around to the natural feeding areas, they're going to leave this area and they're not going to come back. I want a strong blow in here to keep the carp in here. And just round the corner, another angler is fishing. Just seen him as I walk by. I don't know what he's doing with his baits. He may well have one across here, and it's not fair to ruin somebody else's chances. I think I'll leave this area alone. It looks good at the moment, but perhaps not quite the right choice at this moment. Let's move on a bit. Ah, this looks good. I bet plenty of you got spots like this in your lake. This is a swim that we call the Dead Tree Corner, and as you can see, it's absolutely chocker full of weed, lilies and natural food. I guarantee there's probably at least 15 or 20 carp in there, and if I was to put a bait out from here, in fact you can just see one on the surface there, just going through. If I was to put a bait out there, I'm sure I'd get a run. Now, I'm not going to pick this swim for 2 reasons. Firstly, if I put my bait in there, there is no way in a million years I'm going to get the carp out of there. I'm going to hook it, I'm going to lose it. Secondly, if I actually fish the swim from next door and put the baits against the rope, I'm only going to be doing what everybody else has done for the last 5 or 10 years. Carp are not overly clever creatures, but they do learn by association. If a carp has been caught on one bait time and time and time again, it'll shy away from it. And similarly, if a carp has been caught in one area time and time and time again, it'll get very wary of that area unless it really wants to feed. Now, in this swim, that rope is a magnet to the carp and to the carp angler alike. Everybody always fishes 3 rods against that rope. Now, the carp have soon wised up to that, and unless there's a very strong wind blowing in here and actually exciting the carp to feed heavily, they won't feed against that rope. I'd have a bait probably inches from the carp, but at the end of the day I'm not going to get any runs. So it looks great, and I'm sure it is great, but with no wind blowing in here, I'm not going to try it today. So I'll have to leave this one alone. I think I'll make use of this as well while I'm here. Now, it's all right walking around the lake with your binoculars and your sunglasses, but you need to get to a certain height to actually look down into the lake. This is one of the 3 lakes' climbing trees. You can make good advantage of these by going up them. Let's see if I can get up this one. Knew that bucket would come in useful. Now, one thing I should say to all you carp anglers out there, never ever climb trees unless you're particularly adept at doing it. A tree will give you an excellent vantage point, as this does. But I've seen people fall out of trees and injure themselves. If you're a youngster, if you may be overweight, or if you're not a good tree climber, don't climb up a tree. If you're any good at climbing trees, they're very, very useful. From up here I can actually look down into the water, and using my binoculars I can actually see quite a few carp bubbling round the island. Now it's not from this swim that I'm going to fish it. I'll have to try and fish it from another swim. With the sun high in the sky, it's only late afternoon, but it's actually lighting the water up. I can actually see into the water. I can see fish now that literally I was only stood feet from and I couldn't see. So make use of any climbing trees if you can find them. Right, let's have a little bit further. This certainly looks a good spot. In fact, it looks a very good spot. Again, problem is somebody else has been here before me. There's quite a few carp just there on the surface. You can see. Problem is they're only small fish, those. Looks like they're spawning as well. That can be a problem, is that what are feeding fish and what are spawning fish. Certainly looks a good area. Yeah, you can just see them bubbling away. Lots and lots of fish here. Certainly looks a place. I think I'll spend a little bit of time here with the binoculars and see if we can actually turn up one or two fish. Well, I've been here about 10 minutes now. I've looked quite extensively to the left and to the right, and all the fish have been to my right. There's probably about 20 or 30 carp, some into the doubles, the odd one or two just mooch around in this corner that are probably low 20s. The only thing that worries me about this swim is if we get a strong wind, it might push the fish through into the other lake. But bearing in mind I've seen very little fish action anywhere else, I'm only here for the night, so if I make a mistake it's only costing me 12 hours fishing. I think this is a spot to be in. Well, I'll live or fall by that decision. Let's go get the tackle. I'm sure this stuff doesn't get any lighter. I know people think I've got an easy time of it just doing these overnighters, but when you do 4 or 5 of these a week, you're absolutely exhausted by the time you get to the swim. I know I am. I certainly need a drink of something. Now the problem is that many people, when they get to the swims, the last thing they want to do is settle down and think about the fishing. Now that's a mistake. All you're thinking about when you're on your way here is how soon am I going to get to the swim. The last thing you've got is your carp brain in gear. If I possibly can, I always like to spend 5 or 10 minutes just looking at the water and thinking about what I'm going to do. 10 minutes ago I was in carp mode. I knew where the fish were, I knew what my plan of action was. 50 yards into my walk I was tired, 200 yards into my walk I was exhausted, and about 50 yards from home I really didn't want to be fishing, so my brain is not on what it should be. I've got back to the swim now, I'm sat here, still fish showing, 1 or 2 moving about ready for the evening. I'm almost tempted to use a floater at the moment, but the sun's just gone in and oh yes, as you've heard there, a fish just topped on my right hand side in the pads. I really don't want to start taking them off the surface just at the moment. I've seen 1 or 2 areas that I fancy the fish. I'm just going to sit here for 5 or 10 minutes. I've probably got 2 hours of light before it goes dark and think about what I'm going to do. It's too obvious just to chuck one where the fish is shown. There's a lot of water in front of me here, and by the time I've got my carp brain into gear in the next 10 minutes, I'll know exactly where to put those baits and why. In the meantime, I think I'll have a Pepsi Max. Well, I've had my 10 minutes, I've had my Pepsi, very nice indeed, got my blood sugar level going again. I've not seen many fish at all to my left. I've looked left and looked right. Looking left at the big bed of pads, that's a cracking swim usually, but I've seen absolutely no sign of fish at all. The only sign of fish I've seen have been on my right hand side in this padded area. Now the problem about these short sessions is that where you unpack your tackle is usually where you stay. You have to get it right. If I get it wrong, it's usually too late for me to pack my tackle up and move further down the bank. I don't mind moving a swim or two down the bank, but it becomes very difficult to move 3/4 of the way around the bank at 10 o'clock at night. It's just not practical. So you've got to make sure you get it right first time round. There's obviously no fish moving in from my left. There's obviously quite a lot of fish on my right hand side. If you look at the heavy area of lily pads and the weeded area, that's a lot of area for those fish to lay up in. The only problem I have, of course, is if the wind becomes quite strong and pushes from my left to my right, it may well push the fish through that cut through at night, something I'm going to have to live with. But certainly, taking all things into account, there's another angler about 100 yards down the bank. He's certainly not going to interfere with me. Nobody on my right hand side, lots of carp showing here. This looks the ideal place to be. The last thing that I always make sure when I'm carp fishing is that my brain is in the right gear. Absolutely no point sat here thinking, I wish I was somewhere else, or I wish I wasn't carp fishing tonight, I really could be doing something else. Believe you me, I have plenty of other interests than carp fishing, but there are some nights when you just have to be here and carping, but there are other nights when your mind wanders and there's other things. Still, we can't think about those things. We're carp fishing, we're going to try and catch a few carp. Now looking out at the water, there's lots of visual signs out there. You've got the pads here, the clear gap in the pads, the cut through, the weeded areas. Now it'd be very easy for me just to pick up my carp rods and just to cast out and hope for the best. Now occasionally that would catch me fish. On a day like this when there's quite a few fish about, it may catch me more than one fish, but it's not the way to be a successful carp angler. The way to be a successful carp angler is A, to do your homework in advance. In other words, you should have some idea of the features there are here. It's a swim I've plumbed before, so I've an idea there is a big weed bed in the middle. That'll hold fish. These margins are very, very deep, but as you can see, there are extensive areas of weed down there. I'm probably going to need to do a pop-up. Now what I need to do is I need to present my bait on the bottom. I'm not presenting a surface bait, so if I could put a chum mixer out on the surface, there's no problem at all because I know where the surface features are. But once I start fishing in 6 to 10 feet of water, I need to know what's on the bottom. Now, if I fished it this swim before, then that's no problem, I'll know that. But it's not a swim I've fished for probably 3 or 4 months. So what I'm going to have to do is use the marker rod and the leading rod to find the underwater features. I know it's very tempting just to chuck out and hope for the best. And if I was here for longer, I might just put a bait out and hope for the best and recast a little later. But I'm on a restricted time level, so I'm going to need to find out exactly where my baits are going to be landing and what's on the bottom. Let's get that marker rod and the leading rod sorted out. Right, just put those down ready. When we're looking at visual features, your most important assets, your eyes, your binoculars, your polarised sunglasses. Those will tell you what is on the surface. The problem is when you've got bad eyes. Now a lot of people laugh at this when I tell them, if you have got bad eyes, it will cost you fish. I have got terrible eyesight, and for that reason I have to wear contact lenses. If I don't wear contact lenses, I'm as blind as a bat. So I wear contact lenses when I'm carp fishing, and I tell you what, people used to say to me, did you see that fish roll? Did you see that fish roll? I never used to see them. And now I've got contact lenses, I can actually see these fish rolling. So if you've got bad eyesight, I'm telling you, it'll cost you fish. Those tell you what's on the surface, but you need your marker rod and you need your leading rod to tell you what's under the surface. As you can see, I brought them in the covers. That stops them getting all tangled in the bushes. One thing I would say is always carefully undo them. If you ride the zip down quickly, you may well find that the line gets caught in the zip. That's bad enough when it's a marker rod because it'll cost you a float. But if it's actually your normal leading rod, then it may cost you a fish. So always be very careful when you take them out that you don't end up with catching that in your zip and causing an abrasion. I've got 2 marker rods with me. I'll explain exactly why I carry 2. The first one is a standard one, and the second one is one that I use when I'm plumbing weedy waters. Now you're probably saying to yourself, why on earth does he carry 2 marker rods? That's a heck of a waste of effort. That's another 2 more rods that he's got to carry, but each marker rod has its own use, and let's go through those uses. It's a standard rod, this, standard blank. Always check when you put your rods together there's not a lot of dirt in there or on the end, because when you push that in and there is dirt on it, roughens the edge up and it can ruin your spigot. Put them together nice and smoothly, making sure the line's not wrapped around. Let's have a look at this marker setup. As you can see, we've got a lead on the end of the line. This is a 3.5 ounce lead, and attached to it is 16 inches of amnesia. That's a stiff link. We've then got the swivel, a knot, a bead to protect that knot, and a Drennan piker float. The important thing about this float is it's drilled centrally. As you can see, it moves smoothly on the line. Now when you cast out into the water, the lead will go first, and the marker float, because of its buoyancy, will go upwards until it reaches a stop. We drop down further. You can actually see I've got a stop knot. Fox power gum, a stop knot. I've set that stop knot at about 8 foot. Now in order to check the depth, you cast out the rod and see if the float pops up. If the float doesn't pop up, then obviously you've not set it deep enough. If the float lies on its side, you've set it too deep. So we'll have to experiment with that. Now you're probably saying, why on earth do you have to use this? Well, you imagine when that lead goes into the weed, there could be 6 to 10 inches of weed on the bottom. Think of that. You've still got your float above the surface weed. So your float doesn't get caught in that weed, it's still free to go up. That's ideal to use in very heavy weed. Now out there I'm looking at probably 6 or 10 inches of weed. That will get stuck in the weed, float can move right up to the surface. So that's an ideal marker rod for the weedy waters. A second marker rod is the traditional marker rod. Now the other marker rod has a problem in that every time you cast out, if it's not deep enough, you're going to have to rewind in, and if it's too deep, you're going to have to wind in and move the stop knot. Now that can take hours and hours, and obviously sometimes you haven't got those hours and hours. So what we're going to do is use a more traditional marker float. Again, we've got the lead, and I've covered the last 10 inches in float rubber, catapult elastic. Now the unusual thing about this one is that your lead isn't tied to the end of the line, the float is. So the float is at the end of the line and this moves up and down the line. Again, you've got the Fox run ring to allow the float to pop upwards. When you cast out, that goes into the weed. You tighten down until your float is held tight against that. You then pay the line off the clutch and the float goes upwards, as so, until you find the right depth. You calculate how much line you've paid out, and that is the depth of the water. You can then wind in and do it again and again. Now this is an easier way of plumbing, but the problem is that it's very easy for that to get filled with weed, for it to get tangled round like so. Once that fills with weed, the float won't pop up. The lead goes in at an angle, so you might think, well, I'm all right for 6 to 10 inches of weed. You're not. It goes in at an angle and that can get full of weed. So if your water is heavily weeded, this setup will not pop to the surface. If it's light with weed, this is ideal. Again, that's a Fox marker float, it's one of the new marker floats. Very buoyant, casts well because it's slim, very easy to identify due to the vanes. That's the marker float side of things. Let's look at the leading side of things. They will show me the depth of the water. I also need to know what is on the bottom of the water. It's all right knowing that the water is 6 or 10 foot deep or is 4 foot deep or whatever, but what is on the bottom? You can't see underwater, so you need to follow some kind of process to actually feel what is on the bottom, and that is a process called leading. It's a process that's become very, very popular in the last 10 years or so, particularly as the lakes have become heavily weeded. This lead, in effect, will become an extension of your eyes. You are casting that lead out, dragging it back, and the vibrations on the rod tip onto the line, into your hands and into your brain tell you what's on the bottom. Now it's very easy for me to say, just cast the lead out, wind it back in, and you'll know what's on the bottom. But it's not that easy in real life. It takes some getting used to. You can't just chuck any old lead out, and we'll need to look carefully at the setup for leading. The most important thing firstly is the size and the shape of the lead. This is a 3.5 ounce Corda lead. When you cast this out, because of the weight, it will sink straight down. The area in front of me is quite weedy, but not extensively weedy. If it was very weedy indeed, as soon as this went into the weed, it would become solidly balled in weed. I couldn't pull it out of the weed, and even if I did disturb it, all that would happen is it would jump and I'd still have a ball of weed on the end of my line. I wouldn't know what was out of there. So if you're fishing in very heavy weed with very few clear patches, use a lighter lead. That lighter lead, when you cast out, will rest on top of the weed, and as you drag back, it'll actually move. The second important thing when leading about is the type of line you're using. This line is Berkeley XT 14 pounds. It's the same main line as I use. Now when you cast out, because there's little stretch in it, you can actually feel it. If you actually use very stretchy lines, such as the big game line, when you tighten up, the stretch in the line, like an elastic band, will tighten up, and then it'll slip, and it'll come towards you, it'll bounce towards you, and you won't be able to feel what the bottom's like. And again, the type of rod you use. If you use a very stiff rod, you won't be able to feel the sensations through the rod tip. By using a rod with a bit of give in it, you'll actually be able to feel the rod bending. Again, it's very easy to say, but I've got a lot of practice. My best advice to a new angler is to have a spare rod set up and to lead about with a spare rod. Because I'm experienced, I can use the same rod, same reel and same lead that I'm using for carp fishing to do the leading about with. Again, it's something you've got to practice, it's something that we all go on about, but so many people just cast a lead out. It doesn't work. That is the difference between catching and not catching at times. And I'm going to put that into practice. Let's have a lead about and see what's out in front of us.